Every hour you spend half-focused is an hour you will never get back. Not because the time is gone, though it is, but because the work produced in a distracted hour is so far below what your brain is actually capable of producing that you are essentially throwing away the difference between who you are and who you could be, one interrupted hour at a time. Deep work is not a productivity trend. It is a biological state your brain is capable of entering, a state where your cognitive output becomes so concentrated and so high quality that an hour of it outperforms 4 hours of the fragmented, notification-interrupted, half-present work that most people spend their entire careers doing. The science behind this state is real, measurable, and worth understanding completely, because once you understand what is actually happening inside your brain during deep work, you will never look at distraction the same way again. Your brain has 2 primary modes of operation that are relevant here. The first is the default mode network. This is the network that activates when you are not focused on a specific task, when your mind is wandering, scrolling, moving between tabs, half listening in a meeting while thinking about something else. For a long time, neuroscientists thought this network was simply the brain idling. They now know it is far more active than that. But the key point is this: every time you get distracted during a task, your brain does not simply pause the task and resume it cleanly when you return. It shifts into the default mode network, begins processing something entirely different, and when you attempt to return to the original task, there is a measurable cost. That cost has a name. Researchers call it attention residue. When you switch from one task to another, part of your attention remains stuck on the previous task, running in the background like an open tab you cannot see. Studies by cognitive psychologist Sophie Leroy found that this residue significantly reduces performance on the new task, and it does not clear instantly. It lingers, which means that if you switch between tasks repeatedly throughout the day, you are never operating at full cognitive capacity on any of them. You are always carrying the residue of something else. The second mode is the state of sustained, undivided focus that produces deep work. When you lock onto a single cognitively demanding task and maintain that focus without interruption, your brain begins producing something it cannot generate in fragmented attention: new neural connections. The hippocampus consolidates information more effectively. The prefrontal cortex engages at a higher level of processing. Myelin, the insulating sheath around your neural pathways, thickens in the circuits being used, making those pathways faster and more efficient with each sustained session. In plain terms, deep work does not just produce better output today. It physically builds a better brain over time. Every session of sustained focus is simultaneously completing a task and upgrading the hardware doing the completing. Now understand what distraction is actually doing to this process. Every notification that reaches your awareness, even one you do not act on, even one you glance at and dismiss in 2 seconds, triggers a microactivation of your threat detection system. Your brain briefly evaluates whether the incoming signal requires a response. That evaluation pulls you out of deep processing. The research is specific on this. It takes an average of 23 minutes to return to full focus after a significant interruption. But even smaller disruptions, a phone buzzing face down, a browser tab changing, a background conversation, each one adds measurable cognitive load even when you believe you are ignoring them. Your brain is not designed to multitask. When you believe you are multitasking, you are actually task-switching at high speed, and you are paying a neurological toll at every switch. The people who report being good at multitasking are, according to research by Clifford Nass at Stanford, typically the people who are worst at filtering irrelevant information, slowest at switching tasks efficiently, and least effective at sustained focused work. The confidence of the multitasker is one of the most expensive illusions in modern professional life. So how do you actually enter the state of deep work and sustain it? The first thing to understand is that deep work is not something you can simply decide to do. It requires preparation, because your brain needs environmental and behavioral cues to shift out of its default fragmented state and into sustained focus. Most people sit down at a desk that they also use for distraction, open a computer loaded with notifications, and then wonder why they cannot concentrate. The environment is sending your brain 1,000 signals that say this is a place where attention is scattered. You are trying to run a different program on hardware that has been repeatedly trained to do the opposite. The preparation is simple but non-negotiable. Before a deep work session, close every browser tab that is not directly related to the task. Put your phone in a different room, not in your pocket, not face down on the desk. A phone within reach, even a silent one, has been shown to reduce available cognitive capacity simply by being visible, because part of your brain is always monitoring it for potential signals. Remove it from the space entirely. Set a specific duration. Not open-ended work until I finish. A specific block. 90 minutes is close to the upper limit of sustained deep focus for most people before cognitive performance begins to decline. 60 minutes is a strong starting point if you are new to this. 45 minutes is the minimum below which most people do not reach the deeper levels of concentration where the most valuable cognitive work happens. Tell someone or block your calendar so that you will not be interrupted. Interruption that comes from another person is particularly damaging because it carries a social cost to ignore, which means your brain cannot fully dismiss it even while you attempt to stay focused. Then begin. Not after one more check of your messages. The first 10 to 15 minutes of a deep work session are the hardest. This is the period where your brain is transitioning from its default fragmented state into sustained focus, and during this transition it will generate a strong impulse to check something, do something easier, or convince you that there is a more urgent task you should be handling first. This impulse is not a signal that deep work is wrong for this moment. It is the standard resistance that occurs every time you ask your brain to shift modes. Expecting it means you will not be ambushed by it. Sit through the first 15 minutes without acting on any impulse to switch. Write a single word if you have to. Stare at the document. The transition will complete. Focus will deepen. The resistance will fade. And on the other side of that initial resistance is a cognitive state that most people in the modern world almost never experience because they never sit still long enough to reach it. That state feels different from ordinary work. Time moves differently. The quality of your thinking changes. Connections form between ideas that are invisible when your brain is operating in fragmented mode. This is not a mystical experience. It is simply what your brain is capable of when you stop interrupting it every 4 minutes. Once you have entered deep focus, the next challenge is protecting it long enough to produce something worth the session. The enemy at this stage is not external interruption, assuming you have eliminated your phone and notifications. The enemy is internal interruption, which is the impulse to check your own progress, evaluate whether what you are producing is good enough, or pivot to a different aspect of the task before completing the current one. Keep a notepad beside you during deep work sessions. When a thought arrives that is not directly relevant to the current task, write it on the notepad and return immediately to the work. Do not follow the thought. Do not evaluate it. Write it down and return. This technique, sometimes called a capture system, preserves the thought so your brain does not feel the need to keep it active in working memory, which frees your working memory to remain on the primary task. When the impulse arrives to evaluate whether your output is good enough, write the evaluation impulse on the notepad as well. During a deep work session, production and evaluation are separate cognitive functions that compete for the same resources. Attempting to do both simultaneously degrades both. Produce first. Evaluate after the session ends. Build this capacity the way you would build a physical capacity. Your ability to sustain deep focus is a skill, not a fixed trait. The research is consistent that people who practice sustained focus regularly can extend their deep work capacity, improve the quality of their concentration, and enter the focus state more quickly than people who work in fragmented environments. Conversely, people who spend years in highly distracted work environments lose their capacity for sustained focus. It atrophies like a muscle that is never trained. Start with one deep work session per day. One session of 45 to 60 minutes where the phone is gone, the notifications are off, and the single task in front of you receives the full, undivided, uninterrupted output of your brain at its actual capacity. One session. Every day. And protect that session with the same seriousness you would protect a critical meeting, because it is the most valuable cognitive work you will do in that entire day, and everything else you produce in the remaining hours will be of lower quality, generating less value, consuming more time, and building less of the neural architecture that determines what you are capable of next month and next year. The people who are producing exceptional work in any field, the writers, the engineers, the researchers, the builders, almost none of them are producing that work in 2-minute windows between notifications. They are blocking time, protecting it ruthlessly, going deep, and accumulating, session by session, a cognitive output and a mental capacity that is simply not available to the person who has never learned to sit still long enough to reach it. Your brain is capable of far more than it is currently producing. Not because you need more motivation, not because you need a better strategy, but because you have never given it the uninterrupted time and silence it needs to operate at its actual level. One session today. Close the tabs. Remove the phone. Set the timer. Start. The depth is already there. You just have to stop interrupting it long enough to find out.